Like, okay, research findings on can virtue be taught? Can virtue be taught? This is the fifth in the series. The intention is to report on or give findings or give a kind of summative or conclusive or concluding go at the content that we've covered. We gathered under the question of can virtue be taught? Some inspiring material was Plato's Meno, but we took a lot of freedom in following where the conversation took us. So I'm going to start by presenting the findings, and then we're going to clarify that, make additions, and then see if it leads us anywhere else. Okay. So the findings. It's a peculiar or a different kind of research, philosophical research, or maybe experimental philosophical research, in that the act of research, our dialoguing or our interfacing, is itself the value that we want to point to. So like the outcome or the thing that we want to point to is the thing that we're doing. But we still get to content in that process. So there's a reflexive value to the research process, which makes it unique. There's also like a framing thing about noticing that in that sense, very much the medium is the message in that McLuhan. So both the medium in terms of dialogue and then the medium in terms of Zoom, what it affords. There's a lot of potential here, and in terms of the background, gathering things for us about thinking about education and bringing philosophy into our context, whatever that might be, we're exploring with the medium. The process, and this is kind of it's been a creative constraints that we've used, and they've also kind of emerged. They've emerged and they've been introduced. The first is that we orientate towards a virtue or virtuosity. So we're gathering together, but we gather together toward or around a virtue or some kind of virtuosity. The second is that we make proposals about the virtue, and then we attend to or tend to those proposals. So the proposal can be a question or it can be like a proposed definition. And then in that container of dialogue, we then get into into the proposal, make it clearer, amplify it, essentially. And I won't get too much into it, but the middle of our dialogue kind of got into what it means to tend to a proposal, and we're speaking about being convicted towards the negative or towards false knowledge, and that the attention always goes to those places in our knowledge that we think we know that don't know, or that we simply don't know, and that's where the learning happens. So there's a specific kind of tending to the content that is brought forward. The third thing in process, or the third part of the process, which came out most clearly in our last dialogue, was the noticing or reflecting on what emerges or what is enacted in terms of what we are talking about. So we orientate around or toward a virtue, and then part of what we pay attention to is the way in which we might start to enact or interface that virtue between us. So how it emerges between us. So there's like this reflective and reflexive act where we noticing how the thing comes up. So our broad question was, can virtue be taught? And then we what kind of like reiterated itself or insisted between us was this idea of appropriate opposition. And that came in from the very beginning when we thought about the centrality of being opposed or of opposition, and then this idea that became captured in being appropriately opposed became the virtuosity that we were then researching. Now, in terms of the mode of philosophical research that we're experimenting in, this is something noteworthy and reflective of the context. That the value of this kind of research, or the value of engaging in philosophy, is that it allows a virtuosity or a virtue that wants to emerge to emerge. So there's that need for like an openness and a receptivity and a noticing of how virtue wants to interface itself between us. So then it is a finding. We have a finding. We found that a virtuosity that is calling for attention between us is the virtuosity of being appropriately opposed. And that came in the context of teaching virtue. If it can be taught, there's something about the virtuosity or the capacity to be appropriately opposed that enables virtue to be taught. And then we like expand on and make more clear that whatever that's pointing to. The leftover might be there in the appropriate opposition, but I'll get to that now at the end. Okay, yeah, we can speculate and make certain reflections about why that virtuosity might come up, and that happened, and we ended up considering anger as being one of the primary things that gets in the way of fellowship or friendship, and we link that to an opposition of one's will. So if you have your will opposed, it is anger is often a response to that. So then it adds this element of cultivating the capacity for being appropriately opposed is also cultivating the capacity for dealing with or courting anger. The question was then necessitated, what is it that affords being appropriate in terms of one's opposition? And this brought us into questions of thy will, or being subordinated to, or interested in, or preferring that which wants to unfold between us, and having that be the standard by which, or the thing that gives the cause for opposing another. So there's like a submission to a will, and we connected to that to logos, or like an unfolding intelligibility. And there's the disposition or the interest in that unfolding intelligibility that gives the appropriateness to the opposition between the people who are in dialogue. Yeah, so that's findings. That's findings of, it's like summative, where we've come from, a rough area, the process that we followed, the emergent kind of findings from it. The one element that felt to be left over was really getting into the something like the necessity of opposition, or that opposition is the base condition, which there might be something to bring out a bit more there, that the fact of opposition is like the base condition, and then the virtuosity has to do with appropriateness in terms of that. But that just felt like a little bit left over. So they're the findings. Maybe we each go. Hadley is not new to the conversation at all, but he's new to this series of dialogues. He's there at the beginning in terms of the what gathered us initially, in terms of thinking education in our context, thinking philosophy in our context, and we have history, reading, and talking. So maybe Sipo, if you want to yeah, if you have a feeling of any summative or concluding gestures of where we've come, any additions or supplements or clarifications, and then we can maybe bounce off Hadley a bit.
No, I think you captured captured it well. In fact, you captured it so well that things I didn't even know we did. It's now starting to come clear to me that we did do that. So now I think we captured it well. Could you go on a little bit about sorry, it feels like a new experience every time. Could you go on a little bit about the opposition being a base condition? Like I don't quite understand what you mean. Opposition being a base condition.
Sweet. Right into the leftovers there. But that it's just like a background point might be, or in terms of the process that we're engaging in, it's very much like this kind of thing, like the sense of something left over or incomplete. That is the point that should increasingly attract our attention, and that, like, because it's never going to be fully complete, and then noticing the thing that threads between as a kind of I've been avoiding the word, but like a meta practice, like, because that would be the thread that threads the different dialogues, and then we are increasingly trying to notice that through line. But it was there at the beginning, like you can expect, Hadley, that Sepal brought in fighting.
Yeah.
The martial context, he's been interested in that, and its context, or its relevance to philosophy, maybe, or character development. So it was like it came in as an analog. He shared something interesting about the kind of the philosophy of Aikido, how you relate to an opposing force in a way that can use the force, and then thinking about, like, what's the direction, or the where do you, or like, move that force to. And then we contrasted that with dance, so like the martial and the dance as being these conditions of opposition. But what struck me as being like undertended to in our last dialogue was the sense that it's not that opposition is something that comes to be enacted in the virtuous way. It's that opposition is the condition that we start from or with. It's the base condition from which we operate, and then we can operate in different manners of opposition, and then virtuosity has to do with getting that opposition right, like toggling it properly. And then that's the question of, like, what does that mean to what is appropriate. But the thing that felt left over was that the base condition is some kind of opposition, and I think that's important. It's necessary that we keep the sense of there being things opposed, but then it's just getting right what it is that is opposed.
Okay, so I'm gonna quickly hop in here. I think that's fascinating, the opposition as sort of the source of the sort of virtuosity that you're talking about, because it's there when you're searching for a new idea, and in the sense of the proposal or researching fields, you need something to oppose yourself to. There's this opposition is the source of creativity and intellectual stimulation, or something like that. To some degree, if there's nothing to oppose yourself against, or what it seems to be that you're developing is, without some sort of opposition, there is no emergence of something new in the intellectual field, or something like that. And I think that's fascinating and worth exploring, but I think I want to quickly return to the beginning, as always, to quickly just see if I can clarify this idea of virtue as appropriate opposition, because I think that's really necessary for getting into that weird leftover bit that we're talking about, because the leftover bit is the opposition itself, and that opposition itself serves as a sort of springboard for this intellectual creativity and so on and so forth. But the virtue is what I seem to be understanding you to say is virtue as appropriate opposition is how do we handle opposition? So earlier when you were talking, you said that virtue is appropriate opposition, and you brought up the example of anger. But as an outsider, to me, when you began speaking, this appropriate opposition sounded much more like a sort of courage, which is itself a form of virtue. Courage as being the ability to hold steadfast in a certain belief or to face up to something unknown, knowing that it's the right thing to do, not rushing headfirst into battle or, being over hasty, but also being receptive to this scary or embracing thing that might pop up, even though you know you're forced to face it. So courage seems in the sense of the research proposal, in the sense of the philosophical exploration that we're doing, to be sort of like an intellectual courage, whatever that might mean. We're not gonna physically die for ideas. I think that might be a little bit inundated and no one's going to burn us at the stake anymore, I hope. But a sort of intellectual willingness to be open to what we should be open to and be closed to what we should be closed to is what I understand this appropriate opposition to be. We find the source of creativity for our ideas in opposing something, and that opposition is a response to this intellectual courage that I've been trying to talk about. Okay, so would you say that that's an accurate depiction of what you've sort of been talking about first?
Yeah, very much those are all considerations in the field of consideration that we've kind of been moving between. It's been a bit ambiguous how we've meant appropriate opposition, like if we're making the claim or proposing that it is virtue, or if it is this is a manner of virtuosity, and it's linked to the question of whether virtue can be taught. So it arose in that context. In the teaching of virtue, appropriate opposition is important. Then that's courage very, yeah. So there's this background sense of the like mother virtue that we all are interested in would be wisdom, and there's something meta or general, or it must be somewhere there in terms of what affords the appropriateness, what gives the appropriateness. So that I am opposed to something in this immediate context which requires courage from me, that I can make that estimation. That would seem to be in the direction of virtue, but that's still, wisdom, but that's still a bit fuzzy. There's we might want to the stakes for the kind of courage that we're talking about may in fact be embodied, and they may register in that way. Like it might be a visceral feeling of threat, and it might be that very feeling that causes one not to oppose where one should oppose, and that's where anger came in. It's very helpful, because if the direction or that you take or are following causes in another, like agitation or anger, it's bound to set you off that track. So then we're interested in what is it that allows you to discern or to estimate or value that track should be followed, even in the face of something that can be as disturbing as anger. It kind of like raises the stakes a little bit of the thing being considered. Like what, so then the question is like what affords the estimation of appropriateness, and then the context of opposition. like really brings the question out. Yeah.
Sure. You seem, just from a general point of view, you seem to have answered the question of what affords that estimation in the idea of that mother virtue being wisdom. But I mean, it's easy to say that it's wisdom. It's much more difficult to say what wisdom consists of or what wisdom is. And perhaps that's maybe part of the nature of wisdom, is to be sort of, because as soon as you put a definite value or a complete definition on it, it's going to be maybe context specific. So when you say that, I don't know, wisdom is to oppose these sorts of values, then you're immediately going to knock out a certain set of values, and then what makes that wise rather than going for those sets of values. So I think necessarily the question of what wisdom is, and that trying to define this mother virtue is maybe the difficulty that's going to be recurring, along with the difficulty of defining what that opposition is, that source of creativity or whatever we're talking about, because it's necessarily evasive. As soon as we say what it is, it's going to cease to be that thing that we're opposed to. And that, I think it's going to be worthwhile and maybe a good starting, like a good springboard into the Protagoras, because when I was reading it, one of the questions that comes up, I don't know, maybe towards the early section of the dialogue, is the question of whether the virtues are one or many. And if one or many, in what way can they be said to be one or many? And the reason why I think this is an interesting springboard is because in our discussion now, just about courage and appropriate opposition, we've already run the two together. Courage has not been courage itself, but the wise action is courageous in virtue of being wise, rather than the courageous action is courageous for its own sake or something like that. So in some sense, we seem to be setting up the sort of identity between wisdom and courage. And in another sense, there seems to be a sort of non-identity between the two. Because it appears as though we can have a sort of courage without wisdom. I don't think it's actually possible, but it appears as though that might be the case. But it doesn't appear as though we can have courage without wisdom. We can't get the inverse. So
yeah.
I think it'll be helpful in those ways to explore that idea. Sorry, yes, go Paul.
Saying that has been one of our main concerns. Our main concerns, because in defining wisdom by taking the definition, at least what we assumed to be the definition that was in the meaning, we took it as doing the right thing at the right time in the right way. So yeah, so if that kind of definition like fits in every example, but it throws us back to the question, because now it's become a matter of action, right? We've made virtue a matter of action because it's doing the right thing. But obviously, when you don't do everything at once, you do a single thing at a certain time, and now you got to get all these conditions right. And now, if that's wisdom, and wisdom is the mother virtue, even if it's not virtue itself, it's the mother virtue. We ask ourselves if that itself can be taught, because if we can't teach that, how do we expect to teach the thing it itself is on? And now the problem is when we come into definitions like appropriate opposition. Obviously, the term appropriate itself now points to the right way in the right time, and now that seems to already imply that virtue is required in order to teach virtue. And I think this led us to understanding virtue as something that is it in us? It's not something we have possession of. Virtue, wisdom at this stage, doesn't matter which one you take. Not in us, or not something we have possession of. But when we talk about it, it seems to be something that is not necessarily, like, it's not like I take it out of me and pour it into. It seems to be something there, which I'm telling you to look at that, like, pay attention to that, right? So there seems to be a teaching about virtue seems to be separate from a teaching of virtue, essentially. Like, I can teach you about virtue, but it seems difficult to actually get it to be in me. The example we used last time is you could get 100% on a ethics and morality test. It doesn't make you an ethical or moral person. It just means you have a great memory. You have a great memory, like you understand of it. But how do we get to the point where it's applied? And I think of Hile's example, if I'm remembering correctly, was it's one of the things which you can't teach in that way. It has to be experienced. Like you have to live it. Like the wisdom will come with living, because whatever I teach you is a thought until you experience. Experience. And then I think this led us to, if I'm remembering, this led us to the point where I think I was arguing it's better to be taught something and have it at the back of my head. So when I experience, I can be like, oh, that's the thing. That's what that thing means. But then it led us to all these different types of people. Other people won't engage with anything else because the world is supposed to be what they think it is in their head. So they don't get that aha. So that's what it is moment when they encounter it. I think the example we used was Jesus and the Pharisees. Jesus and the Pharisees was the example we ended up with. The Pharisees, in the example, they know the law, they know it well, but they know it well and based on the way it was taught to them. So now, when the law, like when Jesus, the law is here and it contradicts the way they were taught, they're not going, aha, so that's what it means. They go away, this is a contradiction to that. This is a contradiction to that, we need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of it. So there was also that counter to the line of thinking I had presented, which by all means, fair counter, I agree with it. Not if I think we're all guilty of it, but just some things where, like, when we see it, we don't want to accept. We don't want to accept it as the reality as compared to what we thought it was. But anyway, I'm doing what I always do, and I'm slowly falling off.
Appropriate approach.
Yeah, I'm slowly falling off track. I had to stay on
like,
the appropriate path.
how do I live a good life? Get to the right thing at the right time in the right way.
But what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? It's easy to say, but can you teach somebody to do that?
This is where I think
you have to teach them the right way at the right time.
This is the process, like the process element comes out here. It's this the something about that, like, reflecting on the way that what you're talking about arises between you as you're talking about it. So, like, allowing for that emergence, because then it's bringing that element of enactment, and that's another layer of conveyance that the propositional or the definitional doesn't get to or can't get to. So like it has to drop into, or we should be interested in, and we've put it into the like the method or the process, should always be interested in like attending to the way that
it seems when we put together. It seems when we put the things together, good. if we go back to the definition, right? The definition is pretty theoretical, and it's easy to understand theoretically. We can rationalize understanding, doing the right thing in the right way, and what. But putting it into practice, right? If you could do it, you wouldn't be pursuing how to do it. If you could just do it, there's no need to pursue how to do it. But we pursue how to do it, right? And we do that because there's value in knowing how to do it. Which is how, remember when I was going on my event, that what if the best virtue we have is searching for virtue? Because it's always the right thing to do. And when is it not the right thing to do, to search for the right thing to do? In the right time. It seems to be the one thing we can be sure it's the right thing to do, even at any time.
I can definitely agree with you on that last point, Sipo, about the searching for virtue being the only action that might not lead to harm, or it seems to be the one action that is virtuous at all times. But the issue that I'm having with this critique of the definition of doing the right thing at the right time in the right way as somewhat either vague or impracticable, or, problematic because it's not specific enough, is there seems to be like a very modern assumption somewhere lurking in the background that's opposed to this way of thinking, which somehow separates the theoretical from the practical. So the example that you gave that made me see that, or that made me feel that way, was you can write a test on ethics and get 100%, and you are not exercising your ethical faculties, but the faculty of memory, something like that. And Daniel also brought it out in the fact that propositional knowledge has this ability or this inability to capture the activity that it brings about, or that it is itself interested in. And that assumption seems problematic for a definition like this, because it seems that, to me at least, that this definition is so steeped in practice that I think what's maybe different about a definition like doing the right thing at the right time in the right way to doing X, or something like, I don't know, the categorical imperative, is that there's a sort of unity between the theoretical and the practical. So we can't necessarily say what the right thing to do was in the right way at the right time, but we can discuss what virtue is, and in doing so, come to better habituate ourselves to be in a better state to perform such an action when the time comes about. So I'm not sure. It's one of those weird things where I want to say you'll know it when you see it, or when you do it, you'll know it. But for obvious reasons, that's going to be very problematic. Because
Why
anybody,
it's like if you're gonna know it, why teach it at all? I'm saying one obvious reasons is, well, if we'll know it, why bother to teach it at all?
The teachability thing is the other issue that I'm struggling with, for two maybe separate but related reasons. I don't know how they would be. The first reason was when you were talking about the teachability, you talked about virtue as something outside of us, something not innate, right? That virtue is somewhere outside there, and when we're teaching someone, we teach them about virtue, but we can't get them to virtue itself. We're just pointing at this thing.
Mind you, a week later, I was arguing for the other shit. I mean, a week earlier, I was arguing for the other shit. Mind you.
This is the leftover. This is the leftover here. So it's that element of it. There's the need for enactment, and I think there's like a skillful relationship with the material, and we've said that the material is like something like the question, can virtue be taught? Or some proposal, like, because that's what we orientate around, like some proposal about what a virtue is.
Mhm.
but it's important to put it into a context where it can be enacted. And then what Sipo was pressing in that context is that like it because virtue is not something to be acquired, but more something to be enacted, then that puts us into the oppositional or the fact of relation. So it's enacted in relation. We have to enact it and seek it between each other. So it necessarily needs to be enacted, and then it requires a context of opposition in order to be enacted. So it needs us to be oriented towards it in some way so that we can enact it. And then
It's almost as if it's almost as if we partake in it. It's a thing we partake in.
Sure.
Participation.
I want to again just pull back towards the question of whether virtue is innate or not. Sorry, I'm sidetracking a lot, but this is how it's going to be, unfortunately.
That's how it works.
As someone new to the group, I need to poke holes in all the things that I can't find or can't figure out for myself. So let's return to the question of virtue being innate and the teachability of virtue, or virtue being something separate from oneself. So I don't know, in that sort of a question, something like musicality came to mind when you were talking about it. Musicality is not something innate, it's something maybe acquired, I think. You have a teacher who teaches you an instrument and you learn a bunch of scales and stuff like that, but you're not actually a musician until you have that experience of the musical itself. You're not a musician when you're just playing scales. You're a musician when you're playing music. But that transition between, I don't know, being a musician and knowing scales, and whenever that happens, is sort of that, you know? It's the difference between your instrument being something foreign to you and it being, I guess Aristotle's term would be something like second nature. And that seems to be a similar thing with virtue. It seems to be, if virtue is teachable, then it must be acquirable. But in order for it to be acquirable, it has to be something like second habit, or second nature. But in order for that to be the case, the question of whether virtue is teachable seems to flip on its head almost, into a question of how does one, or how can one learn virtue without some experience of the virtuous itself. In the musician case, it's easier because there are musicians. You can learn music given that you can experience musicality. And that experience of musicality will bring you to the bridge where you can habituate the practices of musicality until you become a musician. But in the case of virtue, it seems so ephemeral or intangible.
It seems so passing, like it's.
I dare say I'm not sure there's a virtuous one among us. So where's the example? Where's the exemplar of virtue that we're supposed to imitate in this? I guess that's the ending argument of the Meno, where Plato sort of argues that virtue is unteachable because there's no teachers.
There's a distinction there. There's the acquiring, and then like I think it came out more for us like possession, and then possession in terms of like definitional quality. So that was more the emphasis of it. It's like it's not something that is had in that way. It's not possessed in terms of like having the definition, but there is an important place for having definition and for seeking definition. That line of bringing in like the analog of musicality, I think that can, because for me that like you're playing music and you're listening to everyone and there's a co-creation happening. So then like the question is what is it that we are attending to between us, that we are all in tempo and making contributions that don't disturb the harmony, but are so it's like what, and that's where the language of like through line and the intelligible. So when you're saying like where like the invisible, like we after that thing that comes between us that will help us to be known by and to one another, like, and then And that's the thing that affords the appropriateness to the
So
opposition.
seems
Would
we're
you say
falling
musicians
into
are opposed? But yeah,
every time a new example comes in, it's like every time a new example comes in, we seem to fall back into unity or order and disorder. In my head, I always fall back to that for some reason. Because every time a new example comes in, and then we talk about appropriateness and how do we know if it's appropriate and inappropriate. It seems all the example where something is appropriate, there's this harmonious, there's just like harmonious end in some sense, like harmonious, beneficial end. And it seems every time something's inappropriate, there's a opposition towards the harmonious end. And it's fun when you say that. It's fun when you say this because we've been asking the entire time. So what exactly are we opposing? Like what exactly are we opposing with the appropriate?
This is the mysterious element, is that like we interested in that thing that like it appropriates opposition, or it affords appropriate opposition, even like to the degree where it can appear completely it's reaching for words, but like wrong or inappropriate, but it is appropriate. Like what affords that? And that's why the context of anger came out as being like really, because anger can put you back into a non-disturbance of the other person's will or directionality. But there is something that can appropriately oppose that will, so that it turns it towards that same thing, and you move towards it together.
But again, it brings me back to a Wheeler's point again now, because I'm starting. The more we're saying this, the more I'm starting to see her points when she's not here. And I'm not willing to admit I see her points when she's here, but when she's not here, like I'm starting to see the points she was making. Because I'm thinking the point about damn, now the point's disappearing from my head. The point about the appropriate, what affords the appropriate opposition and the anger. She made a point that sometimes, and this might again go back to the right way. Sometimes a person can oppose you on a matter, but simply because it's this person and not that person, you're not willing to listen. And none of us can explain why, but simply because it's this person and not that person, even though they say exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, simply because it's not the right person, also leads to anger, which is somehow the same thing. You get what I'm saying?
But isn't that because even again, the way we're coming back to the propositionality of things, so you're equating the same sentence and the same definition said by the same person with the credibility that comes with somebody else. I mean, that credibility might be false, but if, I don't know, you were to tell me something about Jacob Klein, I would take your word more for it than if some guy on the street in George came to me and told me the exact same thing. Not because what he said might be wrong or incorrect, it might be the same information, but because having that practical knowledge of you, having built up this image of Sipo in my head, you come with the sort of stamp of credibility on that sort of an issue.
Certain method.
So again, I think it's important to notice that certain people have this thing that's non-propositional about them, that we can't explain why we trust them when it comes to certain issues over other people. And that's because we assume that they are good at a given thing. And that goodness is being, I don't know, at the right time in the right place with the right knowledge. It's that sort of a thing. It's
When you have
having,
a right person.
yeah, exactly. And it's, using your judgment to come to that conclusion about who the right person is itself a reflection on the type of person that you are.
But now the problem is it runs us back to, fuck, I feel like we're running in circles. It runs us back to the virtue problem that if you don't have appropriate judgment, you're gonna judge this person as the appropriate person to listen to when it
Yes.
was the person you didn't want to listen to. So again, it goes back to, it seems you need virtue.
No, I think we've broken ground though, like the because it's this really we seem to be like moving to a proposal of sorts that gets a one many situation like really nicely, because it almost seems like we want to make the proposition that it is never the same. Like two people can't say the same thing about a virtue. So that you don't hear it from this person and from that person is because it's not the same. It's never the same.
Is it because
I
it's
don't know
not
if
the
I've
same,
frozen.
or because you don't perceive them the same?
I suspect
It,
it's because it's not the same.
All right.
yeah.
Explain why it's not the same.
There's like
It's not at the same time in the same place said by the same person.
All
It's
right,
almost,
fair
it's
enough.
almost the river example. It's as close to the river example as we're gonna tread
Yeah, no,
on.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying on that point. I just mean,
It's the same thing as if we look at the definition of right action being, or like virtue being acting in the right way at the right time in the right place. We can't transfer that. We can't say that to save the lady crossing the street in this case is the right action at the right time in the right place if
yeah,
it's at a different time in a different place, because
it's
perhaps, I don't
fair
know,
enough, fair enough.
it's the context here, and in that case the person is the context, or we are in
yeah.
somehow engaged with a new piece of information.
All right, so when we say same thing, we also take into consideration the person saying the thing as part of the thing.
I think
Am I
so,
making
but
sense?
that just raises another difficulty. Um, and the difficulty is one of definition, because it seems like in the case of the person who tells you the same thing and they're different people and you can't trust them for one reason or another, the
Mm.
thing that they're saying is different. But for an item of knowledge, or for a universal, or whatever you want to call the fancy word that we use for something standardized that all of us can agree upon,
What?
it
Hold on 1 second. This is where you lose me every time. Like you have me and then you lose me. That was one sentence every time. You're saying these two people who tell you the same thing aren't telling you the same thing. It's that aren't telling you the same thing that's losing.
Yeah.
yeah,
That seems to be yeah.
it's it's difficult to point out why, and I agree, because it appears to be a contradiction, because they're saying the same thing, but they aren't saying the same thing. I
I'm
get that.
asking, are they not saying the same thing because they're not the same person? So are we putting the thing with the person?
No, the thing is with the context. It's not at the same time, in the same place, in the same way, by the same person. So
All right.
it's I
They
assume
can't because they're
I
not that
assume
person.
hmm?
All
I
the
right.
assume what
okay, let me give like a like an image, okay, but then a reflective point is that we were just at the end of the last dialogue, we came to the what we recognize as a radical proposition, which is that it's it's the one who's acting for the sake of the benefit of the other has fallen, or they are acting in such a way that they are not going to act for the benefit of the other, because it's that assumption of the need of the other, or what will be beneficial for the other, that precludes or makes impossible acting for the sake of their benefit. So then it like really presses home the question. It's like, okay, what is it beneficial for one to be orientated towards? And then it's it's being in pursuit of that affords the benefit for another, because it invites them into that same pursuit. As far as I'm saying, like, I know what is beneficial for the other one, there's an imposition there of one's will or whatever that actually makes not possible the benefit. So in that context, the like an image of the space where we seem to be is that reality seems to afford for such particularity, like such uniqueness, that each instance there is a good or a through line that affords its unique appropriateness in that moment.
Yeah,
And the following of that will never be replicated.
I understand that much. I understand that much, but like, I don't know, maybe in my head,
Can I
in
have
my
a
head,
shot?
I'm
The
visualizing
same,
it.
sorry to interrupt. Can I
Sorry.
have a shot at the same person saying the same thing? Okay,
Yeah, please.
let's talk about what the same thing is or might be, because I've had to do this a lot with people over the past few months. It's the difference, I guess, between saying I'm excited and I'm excited. The two are the same thing, but they're different because the two contexts afford different readings. In the first one, I'm a bored person just apathetically saying I'm excited. And the second, I'm an excited person saying I'm an excited person. And those two things are very different. And if you take those two things and you apply it to the person, if you apply personality to the statement, if you tell me again about Jacob Klein, I don't know, that's the bad example, but whatever. If you tell me about Jacob Klein, your disposition and your inflection and your tone is going to be different than the person on the street telling me about Jacob Klein. And in that sense, each individual instance of the same words, whatever they might be, might not be the same, might not mean the same thing. And if that can be the case with inflection, perhaps it can also be the case with context. Like to say, I was dead because you were laughing at something, and I was dead because, you've passed away, are two different contexts. So in that same radical way, when we start I agree with you that it's confusing when we say two different people said the same things, but they're not the same things. I agree that there's a contradiction there. But when we start to question what it means to be the same, it becomes just as confusing.
I get what you mean, but let's look at another example. Let's look at another, because these examples they show a point of it reminds me of the societal context problem. They show a case where we got the same words, but the same words don't mean the same thing. But let's look at an example where say your mother says to her child, eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Then father says to a child, eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Then the uncle said to the child, eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Then a doctor said to a child, eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Now suppose in the example of the doctor, the child was sick, and the remedy for the sickness is they eat your vegetables, they're good for you. I can understand us saying child receives the same message differently because they're in a position to receive it differently, because now they see the results of not eating their vegetables. But I don't see how everybody there didn't say the same thing, because we get people who say the same thing, like literally the same thing. But for some reason, like it doesn't even need to be something of importance or anything like that. Like even stranger will tell you tie your shoelaces, and you don't seem to care, or you seem to care when it's this person, but not that person. And it seems to be the same thing, because it seems to carry the same. It doesn't matter if I say tie your shoelaces, tie your shoelaces. It's a very specific thing I'm telling you to do. But for some reason we are more receptive. And the plenty of reasons we can list why we're more receptive to some people about some things than others. Like say, I would trust Hadley before I trust Daniel on which material is best for this. I don't know. Which book is best for this and this and this and this? Because you worked in a bookshop, right? So the context is already in my head. But then when it comes to things that have nothing to do with a profession, we just, part of everyday life. It's got nothing to do. We still seem to, even with people who matter to us most, like for some reason, there's some things I don't listen to my mother about.
Isn't that
There's a proposal there, it seems like we can differentiate kinds of sameness, but then it seems like then we're coming to the same in respect of the it seems like we're coming to a proposal about the context of teaching virtue. So something can be the same. The thing can be the same in through context, but then we seem to be coming to the idea that except for the context where virtue is being taught. In the context where virtue is being taught, it has to be appropriate. And that is the context where the particularity is necessary. And that might be showing us something about virtue as being that I haven't brought it out too clearly, but something there in the question of whether virtue can be taught. And the whole difficulty is that we can't come to the same thing that can be shared in a definitional way. But that might be pointing to the nature of virtue. And then it's something in the unique or the particularized instantiation of teaching happening that keeps pointing to something about virtue that we can't reduce if we're wanting to teach it.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's good. I think we need to bring that out more, but I want to try maybe get towards that uniqueness by just revisiting Sipo's. I just want to stick with Sipo's example more of the eat your vegetables. Sipo in that example talked to the different levels of professionalism and how in the different contexts where we have professionals, we take the credence of professionals more seriously, right? So the doctor example, you understand why the kid listens to the doctor more than he listens to his parents, given that he's sick and the doctor says eat your vegetables and the doctor's in a sort of position of power or whatever.
Yeah, because they trust the doctor with their health and the information directly benefits their health.
Sure.
Right?
And then in the case of the bookstore, you'd trust me more because I have credence because I've worked in a bookstore. So I have some level of experience that gives you that. So in matters of profession, you said you would trust someone who knows more than you would trust someone who doesn't know, or who you assume.
I'm saying I'm not trusting someone who knows more than a person who doesn't know. I'm trusting someone who I perceive to know more than someone who doesn't. It's based on what I believe is the perception.
Sure.
Which is why I'm saying it brings me back to the problem. What if my judgment is inappropriate? What if it's wrong?
Sure. I want to stick with the line of questioning that I'm on. I think that's also a good point to expand upon. But in the last section, you said something towards the end, and I'm not sure if I got you correctly, but you said when it's not a matter of professionalism, that's when the words are the same. So when it's general advice.
Yeah, it seems like the words are the same.
In giving general advice, right? But isn't, for some reason, it strikes me that general advice is the most, or somehow more, it's somehow more important than, I don't know, the bookstore example, or the doctor example. It seems like the type of place where virtue or right judgment or appropriate opposition needs the most. In fact,
I
probably argue that that's the giving and receiving of general advice, the trusting of people on what they regularly say is itself a sort of profession. The person who has good judgment of character will be able to know and tell and distinguish when they should oppose the layperson or whether they should accept the opinion of the layperson, you know? Whether it seems like the person who has good judgment or the person that is the professional in receiving information will be able to distinguish or to identify the same information as the same from different sources.
It does. It really, it does seem that way. But now in everyday life, we see that for some reason, it doesn't always work that way. In other words, you can have, for some reason, you will judge this person to be the best person for this general advice, and I will judge somebody else to be the best person for general advice. And that distinction, like between that distinction we make, like there is something that makes you trust that person, which doesn't how can I say this? I don't know if I'm phrasing this properly. I don't know whether there seems to already be some sort of bias. Seems to already be some sort of bias towards who you will listen to and who you will not listen to, even in matters that aren't about professionalism. You get what I mean? It's almost as if, I don't know whether it's based on where you want to get, and then you value somebody who's there, and then you're like, that's the person I'm going to listen to, because that's where I want to get. But sometimes a person can be there, but you just find that person annoying, even when they give you the best advice out of everybody, simply because so and so is annoying. You become resistant toward that advice, and
Yeah.
it's hard to articulate because it's so general yet so particular at the same time. Like, it happens to everyone, but it happens to everyone in specific instances.
Sure.
Like,
I think
sorry again for just interrupting, Daniel. I just want to point to the other point that I was gonna try to make once I flipped your argument, that general advice is itself sort of professionalism, and that someone with good judgment is the person that judges the professionalism of something general. In that statement, if general advice is itself a sort of profession, if someone who gives us advice on how to live well, perhaps eat your vegetables, prime example here, is itself a sort of profession, then their sentence, their statements, the person who can give that advice acquires a uniqueness. To sort of bring it back to Dan's point that he was making earlier, their statement is as unique as the others that are also experts in their craft.
okay, I understand what you're saying.
So
just,
getting caught up on whether we can perceive that person correctly
or
is
not.
is itself an important question, but one that at the moment is taking away from, I think, what we are getting to in, or what I'm trying to propose. Maybe let's make it more me-centric for fun. That there's a sort of uniqueness to appropriate opposition, and there's knowing how to oppose it, and that sort of knowledge is somehow, again, unique or indescribable in that manner.
I get what you're saying, but this is why I'm saying it seems to be a matter of perspective. It doesn't seem to be a matter of the information itself. It seems to be dependent on how you view the person.
I think
it's good that the language of character has come in. I'm not sure if I'm coming through.
You are.
In a little bit jumpy. But I think like something that because we don't want to mystify too much the character or the the thing. Like, and where what seems unique about this is the proposal or suggestion that it's the base condition of opposition. So it's the fact of relation that affords the virtuosity. So it's it's our perspectives coming together that affords seeing something that were they not to come together, we wouldn't see or be able to see. So the so it's differentiating from the professional in the sense that it's not something that comes to be acquired. It's the character that's disposed to the pursuit of that through line, and the requirement for that pursuit is always an other, or like a that seems to be that idea of the base condition, like the
Can you go deeper into that?
so it's that it's this it's well the virtuosity is not good. It's not going to be possessed. It's not going to be, and it's not going to be the special feature of a character. Like we don't want to mystify it. Like, but then because we're putting it into enactment and into relationship, because we're saying that there's something necessary about opposition. It's something then that is afforded by opposition that breaks us out of like uh, relying on it's just their perspective or their subjective thing. It's that we all come together to see something together, and it's the fact of the seeing togetherness of the thing that gives and conveys the reality of the thing.
Yeah,
That breaks us out of
shared
the
reality.
need to then rely on the
and this is
yeah.
actually these are the words. Thank you. And these are the words I was trying to express the point between the two professionals. Like it seems in the one type of professional, like in the doctor example, it seems easier to get a shared perspective of the professional that is the doctor. We all have, because the person, you get what I'm saying, the person is a doctor, so we all have this shared perspective that that person has medical knowledge. Obviously, not everybody might have it, but like in general, the majority of us go to a doctor because we believe they have medical knowledge, right? But it doesn't seem as clear with the example of the person who has general knowledge, who exactly we go to. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't seem as clear because we don't all collectively decide that's the guy to go to for general knowledge. Like other people go this way, other people go that way.
Is that because we can't agree on it? Is that because there's no shared perspective regarding that person? Or what it takes, a criteria to be the kind of person that we'd agree upon? So like for a doctor, you have to go to medical exams and study medicine, and then you know the science of the body. That's the shared criterion that we've all shared and said, this is what you require to become someone with expertise in this field. Is that because virtue, we cannot agree upon the criteria for what it would be to be a virtuous person or to be the sort of person that could give general advice? Is it because there is no one that can give general advice?
I don't know.
Or is it because
now that you bring up these questions, like really, why is it?
No, because it's the question of, again, it's I think it's something like another iteration of whether virtue is teachable, because with the doctor, if we want to learn medicine, we go to the doctor, and the doctor will teach us medicine, and we'll understudy him, and then we'll learn medicine. And eventually ourselves will realize and become the sort of thing that a doctor is. But in the case of virtue, or the case of general knowledge, we go around to these people and they tell us stuff, and we don't know whether they're qualified to tell us this stuff. And we accept this knowledge either wholeheartedly and take on the perspective that we shouldn't have, or we take on it's almost guesswork. And it's either, the reason is either because no one has this sort of knowledge, there's
Or we don't
actually
know.
no one in existence with this sort of knowledge, or it is not a type of knowledge like other knowledges.
Mm. Mm.
I don't know which side I want to fall on.
I think
What's
that
crazy is
that
we chase after. Sorry,
no
I'm saying
the,
what's crazy is we chase after it in the same way that we chase after things we know. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like the way I go to a doctor because I want health. So when I perceive somebody to have general knowledge, I chase after them as if I know they have the general knowledge. You know what I'm saying? I chase after them as if I know they have, as if I see this is it, and this is what I need. And this is what I'm saying. Like, how do we know that's it? That's the thing that's bugging me. Wouldn't I have to have it to know that's it?
I think I wanna return to this the shared perspective thing, because I think it might help with your question, or it might make it worse. I actually don't know. Anyways, the shared perspective thing. In the shared perspective thing, we all see something that unites that thing as the type of thing it is. We see that the doctor is a doctor, and so you, Dan, and I can all agree that the information they're giving is the same information in that case. So it's that shared perspective that allows us to see a sort of shared reality, if you want to call it that. But in order for there to be a shared reality, a sort of condition for the possibility of a shared reality is a sort of reality of the thing itself. So there must be a thing in order for it to be shared. And so sort of the knowledge, it's gonna sound stupid, the knowledge that is shareable is a knowledge that is, or has being to a higher degree than the knowledge that is not shareable. So in the case of the doctor, he's got this real object of study, and what we see when we share our perspectives is that object itself. I think we see the being known that the doctor knows.
Yeah.
In the case of virtue, it's much more difficult, because it seems like with the doctor example, there's someone we go to and we can get to the thing known through this medium. There's this medium between that being and us being somewhere, being the type of thing that we are. But in the case of virtue, there's the shared reality that is virtue. We all keep running around in circles talking about it, and this conversation wouldn't be possible without us being able to agree upon the thing, what that is. But as soon as we try to pass through and transcend to the thing itself, we get lost, because there's no medium, and that's there's no teachers, or there's no there's no thing to take us. There's no point of departure to get to the thing itself. So
this is the juice. This is like, and it's like the manner in which it is shareable. So it's like the doctor is over something that he can like possess or acquire and then share in that way, because of the kind of thing that it is. Like I can take it from him on his authority. But then the like virtue is, it's shareable in a different way, and in a way that no one is authority over it.
Ooh.
So then it's like that's where that language of like enactment and participation comes in. So then our original thing of the base condition of opposition for any virtuosity, if it needs to be enacted, if it's only shareable in the manner of being shared between, then it's of that kind of thing
It has to be.
that is partaken in, or in that there's something about character that's different, like the ontological status, or the like what character is, such that it is the thing through which virtue can interface. Or I've been coming to that word a lot, like an interfacing. We interfacing, and then we interface virtue, and virtue wants to be interfaced. Or so it's like
Hey,
that kind of relationship, and then we track like that thing. That's what gives, in terms of, I don't want to detract from this line, but it gives this what we're doing as a form of research and experimentation, like high value, because we're researching, like what is it that's shining in virtue, or how is it that we can come to be together virtuously, like what is it that's really like looking for cultivation. And that's how I came to like this appropriate opposition thing.
But isn't this activity itself that's sort of a virtuous opposition? The ability to dialogue, or the dialoguing itself, is an ability to appropriately oppose. In doing so, we're all putting forth different things, and that putting forth of the different is it's allowing us to disagree on certain aspects, but to come together and unite in others. So this act of conversation and this researching itself is sort of itself an enactment of the virtuous activity, or whatever that might be. That might be, yeah.
I think it's gonna sound stupid. This is gonna sound stupid, kids, but I swear it sounds like what you guys have just described is philosophy. Like it sounds like you just described argument and philosophy. A philosophical argument is appropriate opposition. So
Say more.
So if then that is the conclusion we're getting to, then we are making the claim that philosophy is a necessary tool for teaching virtue. Because now it seems like virtue, it also shares certain traits. For one example, it also doesn't seem to be specific. It seems to be somehow general, right? So if we try to teach it through something that's specific, we're always going to end up with specific examples. But it's not that it can't be taught through something specific, because it's in everything. But it will only teach virtue through that thing, so we're only learning the virtue of that thing. Our philosophy doesn't seem to be specific in the other sense that other forms of teaching or learning, it seems like virtue to just go everywhere and anywhere. Feel free to stop, gents, if you feel like I'm
so it's virtuous in that it's virtue-like, because so from what I understand, it's virtuous philosophy, the activity of philosophizing, is virtue or virtue-like because it's not necessarily particular. It has a general subject matter. You can't teach philosophy, I guess, by like teaching Kant, because when you teach Kant, that's just a philosopher. And if you only taught Kant, you wouldn't be learning philosophy, you'd be learning Kant. But contrarily, people can learn philosophy by reading Kant, but then they're doing a different activity. They're not learning Kant, they're learning philosophy. It's something that you apply in each use case, and it's something that you apply at a base level in dialogues like these. So whether I'm reading Kant or talking to you guys, I can still philosophize once I've gotten that activity of philosophizing. So it's virtue like in that sense that it's general. I guess let me just write this down.
Which is one.
Right, but it's general. It's virtue like in that it relies on or enables this appropriate opposition, in the sense that we have a series of assertions that allow for rational argumentation, and the rational argumentation brings together the opposed with the opposed and the agreeable with the agreeable.
You see that second one? That second one, it's true because it allows the appropriate, it allows for the appropriate opposition, and it also, its function, it in itself, it functions as appropriate opposition, if you think about it. Because the act of doing it itself is identifying that negative, false knowledge, opposing the false knowledge through collaboration, through whether it's collective or not. But it seems what it seeks, what it seeks is I don't want to get too thin, but it seems to move from a state of falseness to a state of truth through appropriate opposition of falseness. That makes sense. That makes sense. I don't know if I put those words there appropriate.
The words that I'm thinking of was it moves from a state of disunity towards unity, or it manages
that might be a better way to put it.
It manages to harmonize the sort of disordered parts into an organized whole. Because what it does is it takes these things and arranges them in such a way that they are what they are. The false is represented as false, and the true is represented as true. And
it's what you're saying right now. Finish your point.
In that sense, the activity of philosophizing this, whatever this is itself a medium through which virtue or this appropriate opposition can be taught. And the way in which it can be taught is through the self-enactment of this act. By participating in the action that is philosophy, we come to be virtue-like, or we come to be in a state of being that is conducive to something virtue-like. Just as a sort of sidebar, it started on Plato's Meno, but it sounds like it's moving quickly towards the Republic and the Philosopher Kings.
We keep falling towards it every week. We're trying to run away from it. We keep falling towards it every week. We keep thinking that's a long reading.
We should expect this kind of interweaving.
Because the sort of Philosopher King does the sort of the way in which they conduct themselves, from what I remember from the Republic, is that everybody does their own activity and sticks to themselves. So the philosopher does the activity of philosophizing, and by doing this activity of philosophizing, somehow the citizens in the just state begin to imitate the philosopher in that sense. So there's I don't think the farmers and the stuff like that in the just city are necessarily arguing with one another in the way that philosophers argue about definitions and so on. But they're arguing perhaps in a way about crops or whatever, where they can come to an agreement through rational discourse. And that ability is something enabled or aided through philosophical discourse.
It seems, and this is perhaps why the word truth came to mind when I was like moving from falseness to truth, because it seems that the farmers who are arguing about the crop are looking to identify the true good of the crop. Right. And then it seems like now everybody who's doing their job well, like the doctor who wants to restore health, needs to have true knowledge of health in order to restore health. So they are also in seek of truth. Then it becomes the state where everybody is in seek of truth. So I remember the philosopher kings are composed of the gold souls, right? And the gold souls live for truth, where the silver souls live for honor, and the bronze souls live for gain. And truth benefits everything, benefits honor and gain, because if you identify true honor, you live well. When you live for honor, if you identify true gain, you live well. When you identify what is truly true gain or truly good gain, that makes sense. I can't remember properly. But if honor that is misidentified, right, leads to the state where honor that is misidentified leads to the state where the person can be manipulated into doing things that are not truly good simply because he seeks honor, and the person who lives for gain can do things wanting on because they think having gain makes you honorable. Can't remember it correctly. Sorry, I went on a tangent about truth, good, and feeling. But anyway, the point I am making here is it seems that truth is also a fundamental part of virtue.
I think this is the part where the value of this exercise that you guys are partaking in really comes out. I haven't been a part of this recorded discussion format for the past couple of weeks, but perhaps just this ability to sort of foster a communicative space and to foster this character of appropriate opposition or this virtue-like state is in itself perhaps something worthwhile. And it's perhaps how you guys can maybe frame it in terms of a beneficial way of conducting these sorts of educational tasks, or in a sense, this thing that we're doing right now can be put forward towards as a method to teach virtue, in the sense that it is itself a virtue-like activity that we engage in, and through this engagement we become virtue-like, I want to say. It seems very strange to say that we become virtue-like, because it sort of ascribes this character of being to virtue that is almost, virtue exists on a level of being that we almost can't come into full contact. That's why the phrasing virtue-like, it sounds very stupid, but I've been using it on purpose because virtue itself seems sort of unattainable for us, for the reasons that we've given before. There's no teachers of virtue or whatever, or there's no one virtuous around, or virtue isn't the type of thing that can be taught, or those sort of arguments that we've explored seem to presuppose that we can't get to the virtue itself. But what we're proposing is a sort of middle ground, or perhaps a second best, where in trying to get to that virtue, in chasing the virtue itself, we get to participate and take part or have a share in virtue.
Yeah, that's where I want to push the radical, what seems radical about the proposals that we're coming to is that, like, to put it into like a sentence, it might be that virtue is realizable through us only.
Okay.
And not realizable for me. And it's that like the requirements of the opposition, that base condition of opposition, or that it must be that it is interfaced, that it occurs in the relational thing. Because like we picked up this question and the suspicion, warranted suspicion that it's not something that we can possess or have, and we've only been like affirmed in that. So like, so the marketing virtue is like a ridiculous thing. That so we've come to be thinking about the educational question is then the creative constraints that afford the appropriate opposition that in which virtue is taught and learnt by in equal manner by participants. So it's the that's where we had the thinking around the creative constraints. It was like orienting first towards virtue. So I mean, if we come together and we orient towards something else, it gives less. It gives less, like soccer. It's like a limit, or so there's material that we can orientate towards that will benefit us in being orientated towards it. Then we pay attention to the skillfulness of attending to what we propose that thing is. So it's like a gathering of wood, and like how to set it. It's like all condition things, and then that third element of like of tending to the way that it comes up between us. Noticing, at least noticing, because that's providing like the space or the opportunity for it to emerge. This there was this Hadley, it seems like from what you've shared about what you've covered in the Protagoras, that it might be a direction in this one many relationship of virtue. And it seems like we didn't quite get like a full or really clear articulation of it, but we got to the sense of like of both being extremely opposed, like extremely opposed to one another, like this hyper particularity and necessary oneness of the circumstance or the instance, and then like a manyness. But the way that I express that now is not really helpful.
Yeah, there was in that hyper particularity of the instance was I was trying to point to. So Sipo was talking about saying the same thing and different people saying the same thing. Hyper particularity was that it's not the same person in the same place in the same context, or whatever you want to say is different about them. But then the difficulty that I wanted to point to, but we sort of got sidetracked, was that when it's different people in a different space, in a different context, and they do say the same thing. There's this ability to have sameness and difference, and these two seem to be almost required by this opposition. This ability to pass out when the same thing is being said by the same person in the same way, versus the same words or the same thing being said by different people. So it's this ability to pass out the sameness and the sameness as sameness and the difference as difference.
Yeah. There's our nugget of like, there's the nugget of where we need to like press into like the and I think an important part of that will be like there's something about virtue that affords its irreducibility to a particular instance, and then that affords its multiple applicability, because it can apply so uniquely to an instance. But it's yes, this is the element, is that because its unique application is dependent on those who are opposed or following it. So it's the following and it's the emergence between that that gives it that different character. Like it's not reducible to the takeaway that can be applied to different contexts, but there's something that can be reiterated in different contexts. And like, there's something unique about it that it can only be applied in this like multi-perspectival way, or it can only emerge in this way. Like it's not yeah. But this thing that we like, this area here that we're fumbling over, it seems to be this like getting the sense of how the one many might perfect itself or be perfectly opposed. Like how do we push out or really maximize that difference between the one and the many in relation to virtue? And it seems like virtue is something that affords that the perfection of that opposition because of its irreducibility. So like number, like you can have one and one. They're different and the same. They're both one, but they're different. So it's like a particular kind of sameness and difference between the one and the one. They're both number, they're both the same number, but they're different instances of one. So it's like it's a one of the more perfect instances of sameness with the difference. But then because virtue seems not to be something that can be reduced to something definitional, even in a numeric way, it affords a sameness that is always different. There we go. Like that's yeah, sure. We have to fumble around a bit, and then it's
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting way to pass it out, that it affords a sameness that's always different. Or I guess I've been fumbling around this idea of this sort of this unity of disunity that I've been going through with the whole Rainbow Nation thing that I've talked to you guys earlier about this year. It's the sort of identity in non-identity, or the fact that each time it manifests in a different way, or that these things are different from themselves, makes them the same insofar as they're different. And that seems to be the sort of thing that virtue, or whatever we're talking about, is doing.
the same insofar that they are different.
Yeah.
The same insofar as it is capable of being indefinitely different. Like that might be the unique feature of it. It's capable of being different to itself endlessly, almost. Like that capacity is that seems to be the unique thing about virtue. Is that, right. And then yeah,
I think it's perhaps the sameness, perhaps the sameness and the difference. Perhaps it is the same in principle, but different in application. Because that's a pretty common thing, not just of virtue, but in most things. Because if we think about something, we think about the essence of something, right? It's usually shared amongst things that are very particular, even though they're not the same thing. So the same and differentness, insofar like, yeah, it can be the same in principle, but it manifests differently every time we see it in practice. But I don't think it's something that's particular to virtue. I think anything that can be tied to principle has an application. Anything with an essence, which is essentially everything. Essentially everything.
this is where we want to press the differentiation of virtue and test it, like see, is it so? Like, can we further differentiate it? Because like so like number can operate in that way. There's like a principle, there's something higher order that can that orders the differentiation. But then the thing that's so exciting about virtue is like, is it the case that like there is a it's too much even to say that there's a principle, because that doesn't afford the differentiation that we're looking for,
Perhaps
because we need
if I can just interrupt, perhaps rather than saying it doesn't afford a principle, or the principle is lacking, perhaps rather virtue is itself the principle.
Principle,
so
yeah.
in
That's what I'm
being
thinking as well.
differentiation, or in being that thing that is what allows for identity and non-identity to come together in this way, it is itself indefinable through those terms, or it is itself unable to be captured by the reference to this sort of universal thing that it shares in common with everything else.
Yeah.
So to return to like Sepal's example, everything has an essence, right? So let's take dogs, for example. My favorite example is dogs. Doghood is the sort of essence, and each dog is itself a particular dog. We have Greyhounds and Dachshunds, and then we have, like, I don't know, my dog's name's Bronson. It's in the backyard, and it's a very particular dog. Exactly, you know? So even in that use case, there's some universal, and then there's some particular, and the universal applies to the particular, which is different from itself, and it has this ability to manifest itself, to be the same in a case of difference. But I think what Daniel's trying to point to, and what differentiates doghood from virtue, I guess, or general universality from virtue, is that virtue is itself that thing that brings about this unity of identity and difference. It is itself the identity of identity and non-identity, or something like that. I feel like I've been reading too much Hegel.
Yeah, I feel like you need to run that by me again. You need to run that by me again.
It's different from a general universal. Virtue is not the same as something like doghood, in that virtue is itself a sort of principle of differentiation. It is that which differentiates and manifests itself in the same throughout all these instances.
All right.
And that's the higher order level. It's not that there is no principle of this thing, or it's not that we can't say what the principle is. It's that
it is the
principle, and in so being that principle, it can't be defined by reference to by anything other than its activity.
All right, Shane, fine. I guess I might have slightly, I don't know where we're missing each other here, but the point I was trying to make is, it seems identifiable the same way the essences of other things are identifiable. Like, I don't see the essence. I don't see doghood from doghood. I see doghood from dogs. I'm saying I don't seem to see virtue from virtue. I seem to see virtue from X of virtue. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
And it is in that sense that it has me thinking that virtue is this principle which shows itself in all these, it manifests itself in all these actions. And I don't understand, is doghood different? Like, if I'm saying doghood is the principle which I see throughout dogs, like, does it contradict how virtue is? That's the part I'm missing. I'm missing the difference. I get what you're saying about virtue, but I don't see what you're saying about the essence of dog and what that makes, how that it's different from virtue.
Yeah, so I think in the case of doghood, and I'm maybe going to agree with you here, so take this with a pinch of salt. I think what Daniel was focusing on in the case of virtue was that when we were talking about it, it seems to manifest itself in incredibly different ways in every scenario. It has this sort of radical particularity to it, because it's doing the right action at the right time in the right place and so on and so forth. And we can't really say what that is. But here's the kicker. We see virtue in virtuous acts, right? And this is why I think maybe I'll agree with you and retract my statement that virtue is the principle itself, and maybe just say that virtue is a universal like doghood. Because so too, in the same way that we can't really say what dog is before we see what the dog itself is in front of us. So too with virtue. When we try to put a definition on it, what we come up against every time we face the particular is the radical particularity of the thing. So in the same way that we can't say what the right act to do is, we can't say what dog is. Because as soon as we say it, we're gonna limit ourselves to that particular dog, right? So that's the way in which the universal of virtue is similar to the universal of dog. We as soon as we try to say what it is, we come up against this instance of particularity, and then it stops being similar to what it is. But it must be different from doghood in the sense that doghood is definable. I don't know what
It's not a dog.
But it's got this character that makes it, that distinguishes it from virtue, I think, because I think doghood can be defined, but virtue, we run up against an issue when we try to define it in that same way. Doghood, perhaps we say like four-legged mammal or something, and then we specify more particularly what type of four-legged mammal. I don't know. But with virtue, when we say doing the right act in the right way at the right time, it's so much more particular than doghood, that we run up against this problem of divisibility.
But it's crazy you're saying it's so much more particular, and I'm thinking to myself, it's so much more general, because anything you do is something you do. That means it fits in everywhere. It fits in everywhere, but it fits in a specific way everywhere.
And I think that's also, I think, what Daniel is pointing to, is that it's got this indefinitely differentiable character to itself. Because again, unlike doghood, every moment is a moment where an action is taking place, where the right time, the right context, the right place, all of those sorts of considerations come in for the virtuous person, I guess, at every single instance.
Yeah.
And
it's breathing virtuous.
It's this, I guess, this infinite divisibility that it has, or this ability to differentiate itself indefinitely, that Daniel's pointing to, that makes it somehow both more general than doghood, but also more particular.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry, just to conclude in my line of thought, it's like that mother thing that we've got going on with wisdom, where wisdom comes up in every case of virtue, so too virtue comes up in every case of action. It's indefinitely.
In every case.
I think it's good. It's good that the general and the specific are aspectualizing the way that they are, like that they're in such tight opposition and appearance with each other. It's like a good sign. There might be a and we've said it a few times, but this one many relation might be a good thing to pick up in the next. That might set the course for the next bit. It seems we might, bringing in the word logos might be like, so if virtue is like that kind of like that excellence, and then thinking about the virtue of a person, like to be a person, the excellence of a person, and then the relation to the logos, or the virtuosity as being in service of that intelligibility, like tracking that which makes something intelligible. Like it was the dog that brought that up for me, because there's a way in which the dog can be known that you're identifying people in terms of the dog essence, or like there's a through line of dogness that can be tracked. Then bringing that Hadley said at the end there that like the virtuosity in terms of relating to the realm of action or activity, and then that it's like that gives it this kind of indefinite extension or capacity to be extension or variated, if that is a word. Variated.
It also seems to tie it. It also seems to tie it to an actor. The actor.
Actor.
Yeah, it's always tied to an action, it seems to always be tied to an actor of the action.
And that actor is in service to the unfolding intelligibility, and that dislocates like that, because this habit of the possession or the acquiring of the quality that we're talking about, when repeatedly like we are getting pointed to the idea that the thing that unfolds is in some way between. So then the actor that is disposed to that betweenness and the intelligibility of that betweenness, which has to occur between us, is then like that's where, because that's what makes it actually intelligible and part of reality, and not just my like my thing.
It's almost as if the actor is virtue itself, and the person acting is acted upon by virtue, rather than saying that the person that acts virtuously. Because if we say that they are acting virtuously, and if we tie virtue to action in the way that I think Sipo was doing in the previous example that he gave, where in each scenario the person does the right action and by doing so is virtuous, then that sort of virtue becomes a sort of it sort of loses its independent being. Whereas what we've been talking about with the shared perspective and the shared reality and its ability to manifest itself through these variations is itself the character of virtue. And so virtue itself is the cause that causes someone to act virtuously. So the person that's receptive to virtue is, in a sense, being acted upon by virtue.
This throws us back to this throws us back to the point we were at. I remember it was last week or 2 weeks ago. This throws us back to the point we were at, and also throws us back to the point of not possessing virtue, but partaking in virtue. And that started with the conflict with whether virtue is the thing that is inherently in us. It comes up, and then we don't know why it came up. And what we try to do is we try to identify it in us and make sure it consistently comes out, or it is this thing that is outside us, as we were discussing now, and we partake in it, but we partake in it by it enacting on us, and then we become virtuous. But then in seeking virtue, it becomes, there's almost like some relationship where it has the capacity to act through us. In other words, how can I say this? If we're able to identify what is acting through us is not it, right? What is acting through us is not it, then we can refrain from the interaction with it. But when but then we need to know what it is for that to happen. Never mind. I've fallen on a muddy
No, I
patch.
think that
Fallen yet on another muddy patch.
that acted on, and then the thinking being that, okay, then what are the conditions, like what are the constraints that
can we voluntarily get it to act on it?
I think Daniel's stuck, but
both of you looks.
there we go. You're back.
Oh,
Yeah.
was that Daniel? I thought it was me. I thought I was
I think it's my side. I think it's my side. Might be a good place to close.
So when we do pick up, shall we pick up on, well, we had like so many good points where we could have picked up on. The one in many was one, the philosophy as the activity that is virtue like, and in participating is virtue like. But perhaps I think it would be most fruitful to try and push this inquiry into the being that virtue is, because I think without knowing the being that virtue is, we can't predispose ourselves to receive it in the correct way, or to be receptive to it.
Yo, shit.
Yeah.
That's
the word I was looking for. To be receptive to it. We need to know what it is to be receptive to it.
Or at least what it isn't, that like creating the conditions for to be acted upon. So like so the one many, the character of virtue or the being of virtue, and then the logos. I think those three are gonna, there's something that Hadley, in what you just said about the being of virtue or the character of virtue, that somehow I heard it in a different way, and then I was like, oh, the person, the logos.
It's what we've been trying to say, but we couldn't get the word. We were missing the right person. We were missing
the same word said by the same by a different person.
Yeah,
we were missing the right person. It was like, there it is. It's like, there it is.
Shit, that's a good close.